It was the silence that chilled me. No creaks, no hum of the fridge, nothing but the faint humming coming from Ella's room. I stood frozen in the doorway, the sight before me too surreal to process. There she was, my little girl, sitting cross-legged in the corner, cradling that damn doll like it was something precious. The doll's glassy eyes stared back at me, lifeless but unblinking, as if watching. Then, in the softest, most chilling voice, Ella whispered, "She told me you'd understand now, Mommy." My skin crawled, a wave of icy dread washing over me. I could barely breathe, my heart pounding loud in my chest. What was happening to her? To us? I wanted to scream, to shake her out of whatever this was, but fear rooted me to the spot. It wasn't always like this. Let me rewind. It started the night David and I left Ella with a sitter for the first time. We hadn't gone far, just a dinner downtown, but it was the first time since Ella's birth that we trusted someone else to watch her. She had never been the type of kid who needed imaginary friends or even cared much for dolls. But when we came back that night, something felt off. She was unnervingly calm, too quiet for a 4-year-old. That's when I noticed the doll sitting beside her on the couch. "Where did this come from?" I asked the sitter, but she just shrugged. She hadn't brought it. No one knew where it came from. And Ella, well, she was different. Different in a way I couldn't explain at the time, but I felt it in my bones. At first, it was small things. Ella wouldn't go anywhere without that doll. She held it close, whispering to it, like it was a trusted confidant. One evening, as I passed by her room, I heard her say, "You can stay with me forever." The words sent a cold shiver down my spine. When I asked David about it, he laughed it off, telling me that kids have wild imaginations. Maybe he was right, I thought. But something about the way she clung to that doll made my stomach twist in knots. Then, Ella became secretive. She wouldn't let me into her room anymore, insisting that she was playing with her. "Who's she?" I'd ask, my voice sounding as nervous as I felt. Ella would just point to the doll, her little face serious in a way that didn't seem right for a child her age. Her eyes would lock onto mine, daring me to question her further, and I could feel the unease growing inside me. A few days later, things got worse. I started finding her toys in strange places, her stuffed animals arranged at the dinner table, or the doll propped up on the couch like it was watching TV. The first time I saw it, I laughed it off, thinking Ella was just being playful. But the more it happened, the more unsettled I became. David didn't share my concern. He told me I was overreacting, letting my imagination run wild. One night, as I tucked Ella into bed, I saw something, just a flicker, on the wall. A shadow, long and slender, moving across the room. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there, but nothing. It was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Then came the night when Ella woke up screaming, her tiny body drenched in sweat, her voice shaking. "The doll! She said they're coming for me!" she sobbed, clinging to me. I rushed into her room, searching for anything out of place. But there was nothing. Just Ella, pale and trembling, with the doll beside her, those lifeless eyes staring straight ahead. That's when the sleepwalking began. It wasn't just the wandering, it was what she said while she was doing it. The words didn't make sense, like she was speaking in some language I didn't know, and her voice, it wasn't hers. It was deeper, too deep for a child's voice. Once, I found her standing by the attic door, her hand resting on the knob. She was mumbling about the woman in the walls. I tried to wake her, but when I touched her, she jerked violently, then collapsed into my arms, limp and silent. The more I tried to figure out what was happening, the worse things got. David still refused to believe me, brushing off my concerns as stress or paranoia. But I knew something dark had taken hold of my daughter, something I couldn't explain. One night, I followed her. She was sleepwalking again, her tiny feet padding down the hallway. She led me straight to the attic, stopping in front of an old portrait that I hadn't thought about in years. It was my grandmother's sister, a woman who had died young, long before I was born. Ella's small hand rested on the frame, her voice that eerie, deep tone again. "She likes to play with me, Mommy. She was lonely until I found her. I lost it." I grabbed Ella, shaking her, trying to bring her back, But her eyes, those vacant, cold eyes, stared up at me like she wasn't my little girl anymore. I didn't know who I was holding, but it wasn't Ella. Desperate, I researched everything I could about the house, our family, anything that might explain what was happening. But nothing made sense. How could a doll have this kind of hold on my daughter? The next night, I confronted Ella. I demanded she tell me what was going on, but instead of answering, she dropped the doll. It shattered on the floor, porcelain shards scattering across the hardwood. Inside the broken pieces was something that made my blood run cold. A lock of brittle, dark hair. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Ella's. It looked old, ancient even. Ella looked up at me, her face expressionless. "She's inside me now," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. My heart stopped. I had lost my little girl. That was 2 days ago. Now, every night, I hear the whispering. It's like someone speaking through the walls, but I can't understand the words. The doll may be gone, but whatever it brought into our lives remains. Ella no longer sleeps, and neither do I. I can't get the image of that night out of my head. The writing on the walls, Ella standing there like a lifeless statue, and that damn doll back where it should have never been. Every detail felt like a nightmare, too vivid, too real to dismiss. But it wasn't just the horror of what I saw, it was the dread of what I knew was coming. Something had claimed my daughter, something old, something from my family's past, and I was powerless to stop it. But I couldn't ignore it. I wouldn't. I had to figure out what was happening to Ella, even if it meant confronting the darkest corners of my family's history. It started with the portrait, the one of my grandmother's sister, Lillian. The way Ella had touched it, the way she spoke of the woman in the walls. It all felt connected. Lillian had died young, or so I had been told, but now I couldn't stop thinking about her. Why had no one in the family ever talked about her? Why did she disappear from the story so abruptly? I went back to the attic, to that same dusty corner where Ella had stood. I searched for anything, any clue that could explain what was happening. That's when I found the old box, buried beneath years of forgotten memories. Inside were letters, faded, yellowed pages with Lillian's name scrawled in messy ink. They were addressed to my grandmother, desperate, hurried messages that sent a chill down my spine. "I can't stay here any longer," one of the letters read. "There's something in this house, something that watches me." The handwriting became shakier with each line, as though her fear had gripped her too tightly to hold the pen steady. As I read more, a pattern emerged. Lillian hadn't just died young. She had vanished. My grandmother always claimed she had run away, but these letters painted a different picture. Lillian had been terrified, convinced that something was haunting her. Whatever it was, she believed it had taken hold of the house, that it wouldn't let her leave. The thought lodged itself in my mind, twisting and gnawing at me. Was history repeating itself? Had whatever tormented Lillian found its way to Ella? The idea made me sick, the dread rising with each passing day. I could feel something growing stronger, something I couldn't see but knew was there. I couldn't stay in that house anymore, not with Ella slipping further away. One afternoon I packed our bags, desperate to get her away from whatever darkness had taken hold. I didn't have a plan, just the overwhelming need to protect my daughter. But Ella didn't want to leave. She clung to the walls, her small hands gripping the doorframe as she screamed that they wouldn't let her go. It took all my strength to pull her outside, and the moment we stepped out, her body went limp. She fainted in my arms, pale and lifeless, and I thought I might lose her right then and there. We went to my mother's place, hoping it would be a safe haven. For a brief moment, it seemed like it might be. Ella was more like herself, laughing, playing, even smiling in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. I let myself believe for just a few hours that maybe we were safe. Maybe the evil in that house couldn't follow us here. But in the middle of the night, I heard it again. The humming. That same haunting melody that always came before something terrible. My heart sank. I rushed to Ella's room, praying that I was wrong, that it was just a dream. But there she was, sitting in the corner, her back to me, rocking slowly, whispering to someone who wasn't there. "She's back, Mommy," Ella said, her voice soft, almost melodic. She never really left. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't have to ask who she meant. I knew. The woman in the walls. Lillian. Whatever it was, it had followed us. The next day, I couldn't keep it inside any longer. I called David. I told him everything. About the shadows, the voices, the doll, The portrait? I could hear the disbelief in his voice, the way he tried to soothe me, to convince me that I was imagining things. "We'll come home. We'll deal with this together," he said, though his tone was tinged with doubt. I didn't think he understood. Not fully. We went back to the house, but nothing felt right. Ella acted like her normal self, smiling and playing as if nothing had happened, but it felt too perfect, too rehearsed, like she was putting on a show, waiting for the right moment to let whatever was inside her take over again. That night, the nightmare started all over. I woke up to the sound of footsteps, small, deliberate, moving slowly down the hallway. I knew it was Ella before I even opened my eyes. I found her standing in front of the attic door, her tiny hand resting on the handle. "She's calling me," Ella whispered, her voice barely audible. "She says I have to let her out." Panic surged through me. I slammed the door shut before Ella could step inside. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound that didn't belong to my daughter. Her eyes rolled back, her small body trembling as if something inside her was fighting to get out. For a moment, I thought she might collapse, but then she looked at me, her face eerily calm. She smiled, that same strange smile. "She's mad now," Ella said, then turned and walked back to her room as if nothing had happened. I couldn't take it anymore. I locked the attic door, barricading it with anything I could find, and threw the key away. Whatever was up there had to stay locked away. But it didn't make the house feel any safer. The shadows still moved, the whispers still echoed in the walls. And Ella kept humming that same unsettling tune, as if whatever had claimed her was growing stronger with each passing day. David tried to comfort me, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He was no longer sleeping either. We both knew something was terribly wrong, but neither of us knew how to stop it. Ella was slipping further away, and whatever was in that house, it wasn't done with us. Then came the night I'll never forget. The scream woke me first, a deep, guttural sound that sent my heart racing. It wasn't Ella's voice, but I knew it came from her room. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like something was holding it shut from the inside. David and I threw our weight against it, again and again, until finally, the door gave way. Ella was standing in the center of the room, her eyes wide and unblinking, her body stiff as if frozen in place. And there, lying on her bed, was the doll. The same doll I had gotten rid of days ago. My heart dropped as I looked around the room, and that's when I saw it. The writing on the walls. Over and over again, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "Let her out." We grabbed Ella and ran from the house that night. David wanted to go to a hotel to get as far away as possible, but I knew running wouldn't solve this. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had taken hold of my daughter, and what dark secret our family had been hiding all these years. Whatever was haunting us, it wasn't done yet. I wish I could tell you that everything ended that night, that Ella's smile meant it was over. But I can't shake the feeling that something is still there, just waiting. The house feels quieter, yes. The shadows don't move like they used to, but the air is thick with the unspoken, like something is lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to return. And every night, as I lie in bed, I hear it. A faint whisper, barely audible, coming from the attic. "Let me out," it says, over and over again. I thought I had fought it off, that somehow we had won. But now, I'm not so sure. After that night, I knew I needed answers. Whatever had claimed Ella, whatever had haunted our family, couldn't be ignored. I reached out to a local historian, someone who specialized in old houses and their histories. Her name was Margaret Huxley. She had an air of quiet authority about her, like someone who had seen too much, but said too little. The next morning she arrived, her eyes scanning the house as if she could already sense the darkness. When Margaret sat us down, her face was grim. "I found some records about this place," she began, flipping through the pages of an old leather-bound notebook. "Your house has a dark past, something you probably didn't know when you moved in." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "This house belonged to a woman named Clara Walters," Margaret continued. "She lost her only child, a little girl, in a tragic accident right here in the home. Clara never recovered. She became obsessed with the idea that her daughter's spirit still lived here, that she could bring her back." David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face growing pale as Margaret spoke. "She tried everything," Margaret said, her voice dropping lower. as if the weight of her words was too heavy to carry. Seances, rituals, anything that might help her make contact. But in the end, she claimed that something else answered her calls. Something dark. A shiver crawled up my spine. The connection was undeniable. Clara's obsession with her daughter, the seances, the rituals, the doll that had once been Clara's daughter's favorite toy, now eerily similar to Ella's. And then, Margaret's next words sealed the horror. They found Clara dead in the attic, clutching a doll just like the one your daughter had. The room fell silent. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. I looked at Margaret, my mouth dry, unable to form words. Finally, I asked her the question that had been haunting me. Could this explain what's happening to Ella? Could it be the same thing? Margaret's face paled even more. She stared at me for a long moment before speaking. Spirits are tricky, she said carefully. Sometimes they attach themselves to places, and sometimes they attach themselves to people. The implication hit me like a punch to the gut. Was this thing trying to take my daughter? To claim Ella the way it had claimed Clara? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had to act. I had to stop it before it was too late. That night, I stayed up researching exorcisms, house cleansings, anything that might offer a way to fight back. But nothing made sense. How do you fight something you can't see? Something that hides in the shadows, that whispers through the walls and uses your own child as its puppet? Every article I read felt useless, every solution inadequate. I was exhausted, but I couldn't afford to rest. Not now. The next morning I woke up in a panic. Ella wasn't in her bed. I tore through the house, calling her name, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I saw it. The attic door, the one I had barricaded, was wide open. I ran up the stairs, my hands shaking as I pushed the door fully open. There she was, standing in front of the portrait again, her small hand resting on the frame. She was whispering, talking to it like it was alive. Her voice was low, distant. She's coming, Mommy, Ella said, her back still turned to me. She's almost here. A scream tore from my throat as I rushed forward, grabbing Ella and pulling her away from the portrait. But as I carried her down the stairs, I felt it. A cold, icy brush against my skin. It wasn't Ella. It was something else. Something that wanted to pull her back, to take her. I screamed at it, begged it to leave us alone, but the cold grip wouldn't let go. It was like fighting something invisible, something stronger than me. I was terrified. Then, just as suddenly as it started, Ella went limp in my arms. For a horrifying moment, I thought she was dead. But when I looked down, her eyes fluttered open and she smiled. It's okay now, Mommy, she said softly. She's gone. The words should have brought me comfort, but they didn't. Since that night, the house has been quiet. Ella plays with her toys again, like any other little girl. She laughs, she smiles, and she even sleeps through the night. On the surface, everything seems normal, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. I've tried to convince myself that it's done, that the spirit, whatever it was, has finally let go. But every night, just as I'm about to drift off to sleep, I hear it. The faintest whisper, so quiet I almost wonder if I'm imagining it. It's coming from the attic, from behind the walls. Let me out, it says over and over again. I've come to accept that what happened to Ella, and to our family, was real. The most reasonable explanation? Some lingering energy, some spirit tied to the house, tried to find its way back through the doll, through Ella. Maybe it's gone now. Maybe Ella's smile means we've won. But deep down I know better. Whatever it was, it's not finished with us yet. And I'll never let my guard down again.